Hi, Patricia.
Hi,
How are you today?
I'm good. I'm thrilled to be here and to talk about perinatal mental health with you.
I'm so glad you're here. It's been a while since we talked. I think probably the last time we had a real in-depth conversation was when you guys procured this art to be on the front of your book.
Yes, and when you say this art, I know the listeners can't see it, but we can right now because we can see each other. Yes, your beautiful, beautiful piece of art that is the cover of our anthology, You Are Not Alone. I see it every day. And I love it. And I just think it's so representative and it's just so beautiful. And just a source of inspiration to be the cover. So thank you once again.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me. It was such a privilege and an honor to be on the front cover of a book that represents women and all of their different stories and the ways that motherhood and mental health have, kind of collided for them, and pleasure to have been a small part of that very large project that you and the Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative put together for everyone, but for mothers. I know that it's referenced a lot. A few of my clients have, referenced that they've read it and that they get inspiration, and they also get perspective and context and all kinds of things for their own mothering experience.
Yeah, and then it ended up in the hands of the Prime Minister. How was that when you saw that
Oh my
picture?
gosh, I was like, my heart was like, oh my gosh, that is a copy of my art on a book that is about perinatal mental health, which I experienced and survived. And now, like, seeing it in that way was yeah, it was a little bit, I don't, the words aren't even coming to me right now. It was like I had to do a double take, right? Because it just popped up in my feed, the algorithm, and it was like, oh my God, that's my art on the book
Yeah.
that Patricia and all of these wonderful women contributed to.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really great to be able to present him with that book and have a sit down and chat about perinatal mental health.
What ignited this passion for you, if you don't mind me asking, a potentially really personal question?
Oh God, no, I'm totally okay with sharing my story. That's the reason why I got into this work. I went through postpartum psychosis twice and didn't know that it was postpartum psychosis until I got in to see a reproductive psychiatrist at Women's College Hospital 8 years after I first experienced postpartum psychosis. And how I got in there was because I was experiencing a new wave of anxiety and a panic attack that I thought, I'm getting to that age of the next big reproductive stage in my life, perimenopause. So I need to get on that. So I was able to get in to see the reproductive psychiatrist. We talked all about my whole life history of mental health. And within an hour, she said, well, you more than likely experienced postpartum bipolar disorder with psychotic onset. That kind of opened my eyes to, what I had experienced. I knew it was definitely postpartum anxiety and definitely something strange happened. But it all made sense. And so then I started writing about my experience for HuffPost Canada. And because I have a journalism background, I quickly moved from my own story to other people's stories and interviewing experts across Canada and realizing that our system in Canada is so far behind other countries.
When you're collecting other people's stories and writing your own and coming to that realization 8 years later, that must have been like a profound impact on how you looked back on that time, how you were processing the now and the then. and being launched into this work it's a lot to take on, even though it maybe felt natural. It's a lot to start an organization like yours, to be advocating for mental health, and then moving from HuffPost Canada to publishing a book and moving forward in your advocacy efforts.
Yes. I love doing this work right now, and I never imagined that I was going to be an advocate of anything. But when I went through postpartum psychosis, and before what I call the slip, because once I slipped into postpartum psychosis, the awareness was gone. And for me, the psychosis was like a religious delusion where I thought I was on a special mission from God to heal myself through spirituality, and I felt like I had tapped into a magical world of spirit guides and angels. And I know that stuff exists. I know there's a new age movement, but when you say psychosis, there's no gray area. Like I fully believed it. Like it was happening. I was communicating with these magical beings. Like I never want to put anybody who believes in spirituality in a group that means they're psychotic. That's not what I'm saying at all.
How did you come out of it, I guess, is maybe how did you slip, we slipped into it. How did you slip out of it?
So the way it's different for everybody. And for me, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, the Mental Health Bible that healthcare professionals use or don't use to describe different mental health ailments, they don't say postpartum psychosis, but they say like a psychotic onset is possible. And it's usually in the first 4 weeks.
Okay.
But that's not always the case. And there are more studies coming out saying that psychosis and postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety can happen well beyond those first 4 weeks. And it can also be a result of different things as your body is beginning to, go through the motions of having a baby postpartum. They say that it takes about 2 years for your body to get back to quote unquote normal. And part of that is if you're breastfeeding, weaning can have different psychological effects. So I went through a stage of abrupt weaning. So for me, it started off, I'll get back to that weaning in a second. After I had my first child, for me, I was extremely depressed and sad and crying, and I actually thought, oh my God, do I have postpartum depression? Not knowing too much about it, but I remember, I'd heard about postpartum depression for sure. So I called the public health nurse, and they ran the Edinburgh postnatal depression scale on me, the set of one of the screening tools for postnatal depression, and they asked me the questions. And she said I didn't score high enough to be considered having postpartum depression, but that part of their program is that she could come by for a visit and just, talk with me and see how things were going. And I said, sure, I was willing to take anything, any help. So she came over and we sat, and chatted for about a half hour. She ran the scale on me again. Again, I didn't score that high. And so she gave me some, tips and advice and about like how life with a baby, changes your life you knew before, and especially in the beginning, how it's overwhelming. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And that was it. And she was gone. And I was like, okay, so maybe I'm just having trouble adjusting to new motherhood. I'll
Mhm.
just give myself some more time. And then about 6 months into it, now I'm back to the weaning. My baby was sleeping with me in the bed every night because I just couldn't stand the crying. I couldn't let my baby cry it out yet. So baby was sleeping on me, and I was also napping every 2 hours with my baby. My baby was very sensitive, cry and cry before a nap. So I found the only peace that I got was having the baby with me pretty much 24/7. And then I had 6 months, got to a point where I just felt smothered by motherhood. And I was like, all right, I need to get this baby sleeping in a crib because I started to get irritable. The depression changed to irritability. Um, so I got the baby in the crib, the 10-15 minutes of the crying it out was torture, but I did it. And baby slept through the whole night. And I was like, oh my God,
Oh
this
my
is
God,
it. This is my turning
this
point.
is
I'm gonna,
freedom.
yeah, I'm gonna get better. I'm gonna really start enjoying motherhood now. I'm gonna get sleep again. And all of a sudden, I went from like my baby was pretty much suckling me all night for 6 months to nothing. It was
Mm,
abrupt weaning. I had never heard of that term before. I didn't know. So my breasts were engorged. I was soaking the bed sheets, but I was just like, oh, well. So I was trying to pump, but it was just making it worse because my breasts thought, oh, we got to make more milk and more.
yeah.
So I just was like, well, get some time. They'll get it. They'll like the milk will like dissipate. But apparently, in people who are sensitive to hormonal changes like myself, abrupt weaning can really do a number on you.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, I got this major anxiety and major panic attacks and heart palpitations and muscle tightness, and I started to get flashes of scary thoughts, which I didn't know then were intrusive thoughts of the baby drowning in a bathtub, a flash of like knives stabbing the baby. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? Okay, I need my sleep. Because the nurse said, I don't have postpartum depression. I had never heard of postpartum anxiety. So I was like, I just need sleep. I will get through this. Well, I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia. That was part of it. That was part of this trajectory I was on. I couldn't sleep. So it was making everything obviously worse. And then I started having what I call these slips of leaving reality and
Mm,
going into like this dreamlike state. So I'd be running a bath for my baby and then just staring at the running water and then feeling myself kind of slip into a dreamlike state and then jerk back a few seconds later, and it would scare the heck out of me. And this would happen if I would go into a mall. I'd be walking the baby in a stroller, and same thing. I'd feel like I was about to leave this world and leave reality, and then I would jerk back. And it was terrifying, it would scare the hell out of me. But I didn't know what was happening. Then it all culminated one night, and my child was 7 months postpartum. So the complete slip happened when my child was 7 months. I thought, oh God, I'm gonna have like the biggest panic attack I've ever had. I felt it coming on. I had panic attacks before in my past, and I used to call 911 and go to the emergency room, and they'd run a battery of tests. Everything would come back normal. I'd be sent back home. But when you're having a panic attack, even though you're like, okay, this must be a panic attack, you think, oh my God, what if I'm actually having a heart attack or something, or maybe this is more serious than I think it is. So I was about to call 911, and then I just feel like my brain reached a peak of jumbledness and anxiety and tangledness, that all of a sudden I just started saying, you know what? I don't care. I don't care anymore. I don't care what happens to me. I don't care if I leave here tonight. I've had enough. I'm not I'm not buying into this anxiety. Like I had a choice. I was like, enough is enough. I don't care. I'm not paying attention to you. And then in that moment, the Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy's spinning in the farmhouse, the tornado, and then finally the house lands with a thump
Yes.
and everything's kind of quiet and the storm is gone and she's about to open that door into a colorful, magical world.
Yes.
That is the only way I can describe what happened to me next. So the chaos that was in my brain, it just stopped. And instead of calling 911, I called on some kind of higher power. I felt a presence in the room and I felt like it was and that's when the slip completely happened. I completely lost touch with reality. And from that moment on, I did some pretty wacky and wild things for the next 2 years. My psychosis waxed and waned for 2 years. And the only reason why I think it started to go away is when I became pregnant with my second child. Something happens to me when I'm pregnant, the level of the hormones rising, it's a really good state for my mental health to be in. I started to regain what I call sanity again, and I started to come back to reality and got extremely embarrassed and upset about I started to, notice
Notice what you were doing.
realize,
Yeah.
yes, I was like, what in the world happened the last couple of years?
Oh, wow. First of all, I believe everything that you've said. And I thank you for sharing it so vulnerably. I know when we work in these kinds of environments and you're now in advocacy work, it's just another story, and it's quite normal. And I'm again, air quotes of normal to you to experience that. But that story is so profound. And what you lived through is unique, and I can't imagine the amount of fear and worry and like thinking that you did in that time to have gotten to the other side is and have the awareness to share the story and to do the work and to have the resources and all those things like that. That's incredible, because you and I both know that that's not always the ending that people have to that story. The happy ending, I'm going to go with the Wizard of Oz metaphor here because I love it. The seeing what's actually behind the curtain and understanding that those pieces are not actually you, right? You are you, and those pieces are part of it, but they're not actually you. And when you can get behind the curtain and now make meaning of that story and now to help others is an incredible amount of courage.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I don't know. I guess I've never been shy about just showing people who I am, and then this happened. And yeah, of course, it's embarrassing saying you were communicating or you thought you were communicating with other beings. But I'm over it because this is one of the things that can happen. So, like
Yes.
you were saying to the listeners before, postpartum psychosis is considered the rarest of the perinatal mental health disorders, 1 to 2 in 1,000 it affects. It is an emergency, so if you have some semblance of awareness that something's not right, because it does wax and wane. So if you're in that moment where you're like, something's not right here, you can, go to the emergency room yourself, and hopefully there's somebody there trained who can help you. But if friends and family notice, you're having paranoid thoughts and doing things that are completely out of character, then definitely they should get help as soon as possible. I consider myself lucky. So that's why when I learned about Flora Babakani's story, who's a Toronto woman who sadly lost her life due to suicide, due to undetected, undiagnosed, and untreated postpartum psychosis, it just really, really brings it home for me because I know things could have gone that way, especially the second time I experienced the beginnings of postpartum psychosis. So that was after my second child was born. So when I was pregnant with my second child and started to, come back to reality and be aware that something really, really wrong happened to me, I started to do some research. And that's when I started to learn about postpartum perinatal mental illness and psychosis and different things. And I really started to learn about the science of perinatal mental illness and really started to understand that it was a biological physical illness
Mhm.
as well as can be triggered by environmental factors. Like, there's, as you know, there's a whole host of things that go into why someone may or may not develop mild, moderate to severe perinatal mental illness. And so, I had a lot of time to do a lot of thinking, a lot of researching. Everything started to click into place about my upbringing, how I ended up with recurring phases of anxiety, depression, mania growing up, my family history, uh, adverse childhood experiences. So everything started to click into place as to, I wanted to know, why did this happen to me? Um, and for some, they never figure out why. They don't have a history of mental illness. They don't check off all those boxes. It can just come out of the blue. But for me, there were a lot of red flags that could have been caught. So I was ready. So I was like, all right, I'm aware of this. My husband knows now, my friends know. I told midwife throughout my whole second pregnancy. I'm like, my spidey senses are on. We're all aware. We're all keeping track of what's happening. And then I felt great after I gave birth. I didn't sink into that depression like I did the first time. And things were good for the first few months. Then in the third month,